possible teaching environment. But sadly, we know that there are 19 public primary schools with more than 800 students bursting at the seams. 800 students in a primary school is nearly double the recommended amount. And of course, many of those schools are relying on multiple transportables littered across ovals, play spaces and other areas that should be for our kids. And figures released to the opposition reveal that 174 schools across WA have more than a quarter of their classrooms as transportables. That is not an ideal outcome for our students or our teachers, and sadly it speaks to 8 years of wrong priorities and a focus on pet projects. This focus on transportables has been revealed in the latest budget numbers. Those revealed a $34 million blowout of additional spend on transportables as the government plays catch-up, and they've budgeted a further $71 million on transportables, at least in the year ahead. Now, we call on the government to fast-track and fund the proper school infrastructure these growth corridors and in-demand schools need, because band-aid solutions like more and more transportables are not a long-term outcome, especially 8 years into the life of this government. Now, this budget has allowed the government to fully fund and fast-track the things it wants to, like its $217 million Burswood Racetrack pet project. They should fully fund and fast-track the school infrastructure that would lead to lower reliance on these transportables, and most importantly, that would give our students the learning environment and the teachers the teaching environment that they deserve. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Government's obviously about priorities, and you're talking about pet projects. What would be the opposition's priorities? Electric buses or more school buildings?
Well, look, with regard to the electric bus announcement that was made earlier today, we're obviously looking to see how that rollout goes, noting there have been some concerning issues with the C-Series trains that have been manufactured on this government's watch. But to your point, our priority is absolutely brick and mortar schools and essential services, and it's going to be the racetrack and expensive line items like that the government's happy to push ahead with, happy to go ahead with, that we think should be put away with in favour of schools.
What about social housing versus
Oh, look, I think, as we know, government is complicated and it has a range of competing priorities, and governments always have to balance those priorities. There are many things in health, social housing, education a government should focus on. What we take issue with are shiny pet projects like a racetrack, which offer very limited return when we know essential services like schools are struggling.
What's wrong with the transportables?
Look, transportables have an important role to play in our schools. We all know that. They add that flexibility. But ultimately, we want to ensure that as many students in schools as possible have modern, permanent, fit-for-purpose classroom facilities, because that's good for student outcomes and it gives teachers the professional learning and teaching environment that they should expect taking up such an important vocation. There is no fundamental issue with transportables playing a role in our schools, but 1 in 7, after a massive surge over the last 8 years, speaks to a government that's band-aiding a lack of priorities.
I guess for the government though, like no one ever really perceived the population over particularly the last 4 years. Like, is there an element that we're always going to increase the number of animals?
Well, I think again, transportables always have a role, but many of the schools that I mentioned before, which are bursting at the seams, they have nearly double the enrolled students you'd normally recommend, are in very obvious growth corridors in the outer suburbs of Perth. It is the job of the government as a key role to plan for future investment and spending. And our concern is this is clearly an outcome of them not planning properly, but more importantly, not giving school infrastructure the priority it should. They're happy to fast-track certain projects, but in some of their more recent education commitments, they're expecting schools to wait many years of planning before they receive investment.
Are you expecting now that the government's trying to play catch-up, do you think there's a bit of a squeeze on, I don't know, trades or in an already squeezed industry?
Look, I think that's absolutely a concern, and we've called out that the government, with some of its pet projects, has put that pressure on the sector. We want to see these classrooms built as quickly as possible, and obviously we want to see as many trades brought in to assist as they can.
What's the tangible impact on a child who sits in a demountable rather than a permanent classroom?
Look, I think, again, transportables have always had their role, But we want to see as many good, fit-for-purpose permanent classroom facilities catering to these students as possible, because it's about the quality of the environment they're enjoying. It's about the quality of the environment the teacher is walking into every day for their vocation. So I think there's a practical outcome in terms of what the students sit in and enjoy, but there's also a statement about the priority we give to our public schools and the quality of those facilities.
Has your analysis shown that any particular regions or schools within regions are particularly affected by this?
The transportables themselves, we don't have the full regional breakdown, but many of the schools I cited, many of the 19 heavily overcrowded schools sit in that southeastern corridor or southern corridor of Piara Waters and that surrounds. But there are in-demand and overcrowded schools now across Perth because this government has not prioritised or planned effectively.
The government touched on these developments giving schools planning flexibility to allow for fluctuations in population. Would you rather build bricks and mortar and rock schools without flexibility?
Not at all. Ultimately, as I said, demountables are always going to play an important role in the system. But 8 years into this government, 1 in 7 WA classrooms being a demountable, I think if you ask parents, is that what they'd expect for their kids? Or teachers, is that what they'd like to walk into every day? They'd say that is not a reflection of a good outcome. It's not about demountables in principle. It's about a clear over-reliance on them as a band-aid solution to a lack of planning.
The schools that you mentioned in the southeastern corridor, do they have the space to have like the structures built that need like the demountable separate from the main school?
Obviously, the conditions of each of those schools will differ. What we do know from previous reporting is that for some of those schools, the demountables are in fact taking up space that was for ovals and play spaces and so on, which is a further impact on a further result of the lack of planning.
So you would then suggest that they need more schools in those areas?
Well, I think ultimately if you have multiple primary schools that nearly double the enrolment that's recommended by the government, you should be investing in additional schools to meet that need. And that's what we're asking for the government to bring forward investment in high growth, in-demand areas where there's an obvious pressure and crunch on schools. Thanks.
Can I ask you about this spate of road deaths?
Mm.
Is the government doing enough to mitigate the number of people who are dying on the roads?
Oh, look, I'll defer the full commentary to the Shadow Minister for Road Safety, my colleague, but I think we can all agree every death we see as a result of the road toll is a death too many. And we all, on all sides of politics and in the community, need to work together to try and bring that toll down, especially with school holidays having started. And it's very sad to see there's been a spate of deaths recently. I think we all just have to work together to try and bring that toll down. Thank you, guys.